there are people watching this program all over the country, but let's use the South Bronx sort of as a stand-in for communities of color all over the country. It's an older place. It's a place where there's been a concentration of dirty uses. And it seems that uses clustered there, in part because there were dirty uses already there. So when another one was looking for a site, it took the path of less resistance and went where there were already a lot of dirty uses. Left the community, as we've reported throughout the hour, very burdened, very high rates of asthma, very high rates of environmental diseases. But what do you do now? Someone who moves to the South Bronx today is likely to move into an older house that's leaching lead from the paint in the door and window frames, a place where there's ancient plumbing, which may not be the best, where there's concentrations of mold and vermin in the walls and floors and basements. How do you undo what it took 150 years to make the South Bronx into?
Well, the key word here is accountability. What you're talking about is a vicious circle. Someone came in, polluted the community, moved out. Then someone came in, saw that that community was cheaper to set up a shop over there, came in, polluted it, and moved on. There was no accountability. The polluter was not paying for the consequences. So if you see, if a corporation sees actually that the polluter pays, that corporation will take that into account, as you said in the spreadsheet, right? Mm-hmm. And that will be taken into, that's going to be a cost, because historically that was not a cost. Whatever is spewed out to the community belongs to the community, not to the corporation anymore. That should not be the case. Accountability. If you pollute, you pay, you clean.
Was this problem created in part by the fact that for most of our history, it's been free to pollute? If you did something that made smoke come out of a stack or made chemicals come out of a pipe and go into the notoriously filthy Bronx River, it was free, wasn't it?
I don't think that's necessarily true. Like I said, I think there was an environmental transition where these pollutants, no one really understood necessarily what the environmental impacts were. So you had these companies emitting smoke or sometimes, a lot of the times, it's just vapor or things like that. And no one really knew what the environmental consequences were. So I think that's part of the problem. But as we saw, as our economy grows,
come on, Nicholas, no one knew what the environmental consequences were. The air smelled bad. You could see it. When you poured hot water, sometimes what's coming out of a factory is not some exotic chemical, just lots of hot water. But they would dump hot water into an open waterway, and dead fish would float on the top, and you knew that one of the environmental consequences of dumping hot water in the river is all those dead fish.
Right, and you learn from those.
And you didn't get a bill. You didn't get a bill from the fish or the river or the local government. You just did it for free.
Right, but that's something obviously we learn from. And if these pollutants are causing problems like that, then we correct them. And these are obviously in economics 101. One of the things you learn about is externalities, and that's a negative externality that needs to be internalized, and that's where, as you said, accountability does come into play. As far as New York specifically, I think one of the better things we can do is remove rent controls. Rent controls crowd out people that would be willing to pay for more money for these apartments, and that would allow landlords and owners to make the renovations necessary to clean up these apartments. And I think that's one different but very simple thing we could do that would bring more money into the communities.
But it wouldn't make the circle of highways, the noise and emissions disappear. It might improve the housing stock. I'll go with you there. But some of the environmental realities that an older central city neighborhood like the South Bronx faces is not caused by rent control, is it?
No, but this gets back to somewhat like rent control, is that we have these antiquated regulations in place, and that prevents companies from building newer, more efficient plants and more environmental friendly plants. So it's more economically friendly for these companies to keep an older plant in place than to build a newer one. And I think a part of that has to do with the regular scheme we have set up today.
Are we costing pollution now? Do we make
Ray, I'm
part
sorry.
of it.
I need to jump in here. When you guys were saying that corporations didn't know whether the pollutants were actually the ones poisoning the community or not. Let me give you, there's so many examples, historic examples, so many victims of this, so many people who have died of cancer for this. Asarco in El Paso, Texas. This was a lead smelter. It spewed heavy metals and other poisons for 110 years, okay? 110 years. There's actually a shadow of pollutants that go all across the Rio Grande, over to New Mexico, to a little community, a Hispanic community, which is 90% Latino over there, Anapra. The levels of lead poisoning around this monster called Asarco is sometimes 80%. 80% of the kids that live in Anapra have dangerous levels of lead in the blood, okay? Asarco was shut down in 1999, but they reapplied to open it again. We fought that for many, many years. Asarco knew fully well that they were poisoning the community and that the origin of the lead was the smelter, and they kept going at it. We had to fight for it. Corporations do know that they're polluting. Again, we have a key word here, accountability. If a regulator lets the Asarco pollute for 110 years, Asarco will continue doing it. And there will be other copycats because the regulator is not doing his job.
So if that's the case, then why didn't the EPA come down on this company? Why did they let it continue for such a long time?
Well, because the regulations were not there. I'm not saying that the EPA are saints at all. We get on the case of the EPA many times, okay? I'm saying that this was a community that was being poisoned. You know, lead in your blood, especially when you're a kid, stays there if you don't eliminate it, and it stays in your bones. Lead makes you a very violent person. The rates of violence in Anapra are through the roof. Just about every single kid in high school has a police record. It's because of the lead, okay? I'm not saying that the EPA should allow this. No, they should increase the regulation to make it tougher for a polluter like this to spew lead, cadmium, and other poisons to the community.
For the last, well, the whole post-war era, really, for the last 60 years, we've heard from economists that if you make something costly, you'll get less of it. Have we made polluting costly in a way that means you will get less of it?
No, of course not. We have not made polluting a more expensive enterprise. I mean, this is a really sweet deal for the polluters. You make a product, and then you have an excess or whatever, you have garbage, and then you put it out. That's it. And then the community takes it. That's not it. The pollutants that come out of making any product in the United States should attach a price tag because of those pollutants, and it's not.
Nicholas, same question. Does polluting carry a price tag that's onerous enough to make people stop doing it?
Well, I think there are abatements, and I think that these companies are well under the abatement costs and the abatement regulations. And as we've seen through economic growth, the real pollutants like NO2 and SO2 and the sulfur dioxide have decreased as a result of this economic growth. And now they're focusing on carbon dioxide regulations, and that's what I see as the real problem to low-income communities is, as you said, if you tax something, you get less of it. And carbon dioxide regulations is a huge tax on energy. And when these low-income families spend a disproportionate amount of their money on energy costs, that's going to be a much bigger effect.